You are listening to The World As I See It podcast. 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 As I See It podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The World As I See It podcast. I am so excited that you are here with me today for episode 55. So today we are going to be talking about what life was like before the Americans with Disabilities Act or the ADA, and pretty much what happened for the ADA to be signed into law and become law, and what the ADA does today. And when I look back at this, it's both super interesting and frustrating. You know, because I especially take the signage on Braille elevators, the Braille on the elevator buttons, I take that for granted. I'm sure that those ramped entrances and the curb cuts, I also take for granted. But if we go back in time to the 1980s, which, crazy, this wasn't even 40 years ago, America, it was completely different for anyone living with a disability. Back then, if you used a wheelchair or, something of that sort, a simple 3-inch concrete curb on a sidewalk, it wasn't just this minor inconvenience. It was a barrier. It was a physical barrier that you could not get around. And public buses, they didn't have lifts. Subway stations, they had stairs, but they didn't have elevators. If a store had a flight of steps out front and no ramp, you just simply didn't go in there because you couldn't. Again, it's a barrier. And, once you got inside a building, if you were blind and you relied on the Braille buttons for the elevators, or you needed to get on the second floor, there would be no way to do it because there wasn't anything in the law that required, it to be accessible, which is crazy because if I were to go into an elevator back then, I don't know what I would have done. I would have had to rely on somebody else for help because there was no law that said, hey, you have to make this place accessible, which is crazy. And here was the most frustrating part. And like I just said, legally, nobody had to fix it. There was no law that said your building had to be accessible at the time. Buildings didn't have to adapt. Buses didn't have to add ramps. And if a landlord or a business turned you away, you had zero legal protection. And here's one of the things when I was doing my research that frustrated me the most. In the job market, prior to the ADA, in 1990, roughly 2/3, nearly 70% of working age disabled Americans were completely unemployed. Yep. And you want to know what the worst thing about that is? An employer could literally look at a qualified applicant, the applicant could have all the experience. If they seen that they used a white cane, a guide dog, or a wheelchair, they literally could say, no, I don't want to hire you because of your disability. No, thank you. Like, what? That's like, wow. That right there, I'm sure, was very frustrating to the people before the ADA because they couldn't work because just these employers were like, no, I don't want to hire you because of your blindness or because you have a wheelchair. And for decades, like, disabled activists, they tried to fight. You know, they rallied, they marched, and they tried to get Congress. They lobbied Congress for basic civil rights. But by early 1990, the bill that would change everything, the Americans with Disabilities Act, it was completely stuck in Congress. It was not going anywhere. Because politicians, they were dragging their feet. They were arguing over the cause and delaying votes month after month. So these activists, they were like, okay, we're done being nice. Our polite meetings, they're not working. We need to figure out something else. So, they said that it was time to make sure that Congress couldn't look away. That Congress had to go, okay, yeah, we need to do something about this. So, on March 12, 1990, over 400 disability rights advocates, they gathered at the United States Capitol building in Washington, D.C. So after speeches and rallies at the base of the plaza, more than 60 activists decided to do something that shocked the entire country. So they left their wheelchairs and mobility canes at the bottom of the monument, and then they began physically crawling up the 78 stone marble steps of the Capitol building. Wow. I think if I had seen that would be like, yeah, this is unforgettable. And this moment, it became known as the Capitol Crawl. I can only just imagine, watching adults and young people dragging themselves up the hard, cold stone steps using only their arms and upper body strength, step by painful step. They were physically showing to the entire nation the literal barriers that they faced every single day just trying to participate in society. And one of the most unforgettable activists that day was an 8-year-old girl named Jennifer Keelan. And she had cerebral palsy. And as the cameras captured her hauling herself up those giant steps, she looked up and famously said, "I'll take all night if I have to." And that's commitment. That is advocation. That is, I'm proving to you that I can do this, but we need something to change. And, of course that visual, it hit the national news. And it pretty much forced the lawmakers to see the truth. That accessibility, it wasn't just some luxury or a favor. It was a basic civil right. So, just 4 months later, on July 26, 1990, President George H.W. Bush signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into federal law. Yay! The ADA, it completely reshaped modern life. It mandated physical accessibility in public places. It brought Braille to elevators and public buildings, and most of all, it guaranteed accommodations in telecommunications, and it made discrimination in employment illegal. That's awesome. I mean, that's great. And fast forward to today. And, we still have work to do. But the impact of the ADA alongside digital accessibility and remote work, it has driven working age disability employment to historic heights. reaching nearly 38% overall and up to 57% for younger adults aged 25 to 34. Remember, it was 2/3 earlier, before the ADA. It was 78% before the ADA. So this is huge. And the Capitol Crawl, it proved that when a community unites and demands to be heard, that they can literally move mountains, or in this case, climb marble steps to change the world. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel on YouTube. And if you're listening on Spotify, leave a comment right on the episode page and drop a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it and send it to your friends and family. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or thoughts, send me an email at theworldasIseeitpodcast@gmail.com. Next week, we are diving into part 1 of our history of reading without sight, exploring life before Braille. So stay tuned for next week. Stay curious, keep listening, and I will talk to you in episode 56.
You've been listening to the World as I See It podcast.